Today we're looking at Islam. As we examine this world religion, we want to understand the connections between Abrahamic religions, learn the rise of the third of these religions and its impact on the cultural landscape of Southwest Asia, South Asia, and North Africa, as well as examine the central tenets of Islam. To begin, Abrahamic religions are those stemming from the same founder, an individual known as Abraham of Ur. It is believed that Abraham of Ur lived around 2000 BC or 2000 BCE. He came from a region known as the Fertile Crescent. This is the land that stretches between the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers, two rivers that run between modern-day Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. He lived in a polytheistic society. A polytheistic society is one that worships many gods. And according to the tradition, God came to Abraham of Ur and he told him, if Abraham were to stop worshiping all other gods and recognize only him as the one true God, he would give to Abraham or enter into a covenant with Abraham. This is like a spiritual contract. Abraham would follow him, follow all of his tenets and all of the laws of God. And in exchange, Abraham of Ur would receive a land far away from Ur, one in which his descendants would create a new nation, a nation dedicated to the worship of the one true God. According to the tradition, Abraham of Ur accepted this covenant. He traveled from the land with his family and his servants. Eventually, he did establish a family. He did establish a nation. This nation would become known as the nation of the Jews. His descendants, likewise, settled initially in an area that we know as Israel, the former region of Palestine. And from there, they too became nomadic, eventually traveling to Egypt, where they spent a time in slavery, before finally following a leader by the name of Moses from Egypt back to the land at that time known as Palestine. There they conquered many of the inhabitants and established the first kingdom of Israel roughly around 1000 BCE. There they established at their capital of Jerusalem the first temple of Jerusalem. This was recognized as God's house on earth. There, the followers of Judaism would come to present their sacrifices of animals and grains. And there they would come to learn and to worship about their God. Now, roughly around the 6th century BC, a tragedy occurred for the kingdom of Israel. They were conquered, and they were taken away to resettle in the lands of the empire of Babylon. Eventually, the Babylonians were conquered, and the Israelis or Jews were allowed to return to Jerusalem, rebuild the temple, and settle there. Now, they settled there up until 70 AD, or 70 Common Era. By 70 Common Era, the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah had been conquered by the Roman Empire. The Romans allowed them a large degree of self-autonomy. However, there were numerous revolts against Roman rule. And finally, in 70 AD, the Romans decided that they wanted to permanently put down any further revolts by the Jewish population. As such, they went into Jerusalem, conquered the people leading the revolt. They destroyed the Temple of Jerusalem and forced all of the inhabitants of the city and the surrounding areas to disperse into different regions of the Roman Empire. This was known as the Second Diaspora. A diaspora is basically a mass migration of people into different lands. Now, this again was the Second Diaspora. And each time the Jewish population was forced from their home, their religion had to evolve. It had to evolve because the Temple of Jerusalem was crucial. Again, it was the house of God. Again, it was the place where you were supposed to go and present your sacrifices. Without access to this temple, it was difficult to carry out this ritual. During the second diaspora, Judaism evolved to move away from being a temple religion. And instead, it was a religion that revolved around the synagogue. There in the synagogue, Jews would gather together within a community. They would read from the Torah, which was the most holy book of the Jewish faith, what we recognize today as the first 5 books of the Christian Old Testament. And they governed their communities with another collection of writings known as the Talmud. This was basically a collection of their community laws that governed many aspects about daily life. Now, as time progressed, the Jewish communities located throughout Europe consistently faced outbreaks of violence against them, as well as hatred and discrimination. This form of hatred against Jews is known today as anti-Semitism. After a millennia of experiencing this anti-Semitism, there arose within the Jewish community a movement known as Zionism. This was a desire to find a homeland for the people who did not have a home, and their sights returned to that of Palestine, their ancestral home. Eventually, they were able to return home, beginning in the late or early 1900s. And there they found another population already living within these lands, and these were the Palestinians. Over time, these two communities devolved into a series of wars known as the Arab-Israeli Wars. And from these wars, a new nation was born, that of Israel. Now, in returning home, the Jewish population found that all that remained of their traditional temple, the early Temple of Jerusalem, was a structure known as the Wailing Wall. This was basically the base, the foundation of the former temple. And today, the Wailing Wall remains a sacred site amongst the global Jewish community, one in which people can make a pilgrimage and there connect with their faith. Now, from Judaism, as we saw in an earlier video, Christianity arose, and eventually it spread throughout the Roman Empire and into Europe to become the dominant religion. This was the second of the Abrahamic religions, Judaism being the first. Now, around 610 AD, a new faith emerged, the third faith within the family of Abrahamic religions, and this was Islam. Now, today, because of the war on terror and because of some of the depictions of what we consider to be extremists within Hollywood films, it can be a problem that some people fall into the misconception that Islam is a violent religion, when in truth it is not. If you look at the heart of Islam, if you look at the word itself within Arabic words are generally formed from 3 consonants. The 3 crucial consonants right here being Sin, Lam, and Mim. All words within Arabic usually come from moving these consonants around and changing up the vowing of these consonants. So it doesn't really matter how the word exists. There is a central meaning attached to these 3 consonants. These 3 consonants are usually attached to words dealing with peace or submission to the will of Allah. So a good example of this is the word itself, salam. Salam is found in a common traditional Arabic greeting, Assalamu alaikum, to which the recipient responds, Alaikum wassalam. This basically means peace be with you. So, at the heart of Islam is the concept of peace, as well as the concept of submitting one's will to that of Allah, Allah being the Arabic word for God. Now, the story of Islam begins with an individual by the name of Muhammad. He was born roughly around 570 AD, and he lived in a region of the Middle East, or modern Southwest Asia, known as the Hijaz. The Hijaz can be found on this map right here on the coastal region of the Arabian Peninsula that borders the Red Sea. There in the Hijaz were two principal cities, Mecca and Medina. Mecca had been a major settlement for many of the nomadic tribes in this area, including Muhammad's clan, which happened to be one of the most powerful tribes in the area. At the time that Muhammad was born, this was a polytheistic society. But Muhammad was never fully content with following this religion. He felt a higher calling. And as a spiritual individual, he took yearly retreats into the surrounding countryside, and there he would spend time both with his family as well as spend time in meditation. According to tradition, Muhammad began to receive revelations around 610 AD. According to the story, the angel Gabriel came to him during one of his meditations and said to Muhammad, recite, at which Muhammad did not fully understand, and so Gabriel said again, recite. Once again, Gabriel was not able to truly understand what was expected of him, and so the third time Gabriel said to him, recite. And the message that Gabriel relayed to Muhammad from God became the first of many revelations that together, when compiled into the holy book of Islam known as the Quran, was Surah 96. Surah 96, roughly what we would call like a chapter in a religious book. Now, Muhammad over time received many revelations, and from these revelations and from these teachings that Gabriel relayed to Muhammad, we get what are called the 5 pillars of Islam. The first pillar is that of Shahada. Shahada is a declaration of faith, and it's very basic, and it explains within its words, it's one sentence, all aspects really of Islam. The Shahada states that there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. And so right there we recognize, number one, the idea of Tawhid, the idea of oneness of God, the idea of monotheism at the heart of Islam. The second important fact that we see here, the second important revelation, is that Muhammad is the last in a series of prophets that stretch back to Abraham through Moses, includes Jesus, but is completed with Muhammad. So the idea here is that there are no revelations following that were those that were given to Muhammad. Now, this next pillar of Islam is that of Salat. Salat is ritual prayer. Observant Muslims are expected to pray 5 times a day in the direction of Mecca. Mecca being the most holy city in all of the Dar al-Islam, the lands of Islam. Next is Zakat. Zakat are tithes, it's giving, it's charity that is expected of all Muslims. So this can be something as basic as giving a homeless person a free meal, or it could include something larger, such as donating money to a mosque or to a university for the community. Next is Hajj. Hajj is a pilgrimage that all able-bodied Muslims are expected to do at least once in their lifetime to Mecca. And it is a significant event in the life of a Muslim, a significant event in which they really experience this oneness with God, but they also have a chance of cleansing their soul of any past transgressions. Finally, there's Saum. And this is fasting, which is usually done during the season of Ramadan. During Ramadan, Muslims do not eat between sunup and sundown, and the season of Ramadan is followed by a large feast. Now, there is another misconception about Islam, and that is the idea that jihad, or religious struggle, is somehow a core principle within Islam. The misperception is that holy war somehow is expected of all Muslims, or that somehow this idea of fighting physically in the name of God is considered a crucial virtue. This is not necessarily the case. In fact, the concept of jihad itself relates to the idea of a struggle. And there are actually three different levels of this struggle, if you will. There is jihad of the sword, which is considered the least virtuous, the least noble of the three levels. There is jihad of the mouth, and then jihad of the heart. So jihad of the sword, this is not much different than what you find in other religions, the idea that you should be able to defend your faith if it comes under attack, that you should be able to defend your community if it comes physically under attack against others. Now, because of 9/11 in American society, people usually associate this idea of, fighting, holy war, with terrorism. It's actually very clear within the Quran that non-combatants are not allowed to be targeted during these conflicts. In fact, the vast majority of Muslims throughout the world see this as a form of extremism that is not permitted. So there is jihad of the sword, but more noble than that is jihad of the mouth. And this is the idea of spreading the teachings of Islam to others, to speaking out for truth, for virtue, for goodness. And then finally, there is jihad of the heart. And this is the struggle that all believers undertake on a daily basis to be a good person, to practice what they preach through their faith. Now, the teachings of Islam can be found within the Quran. The Quran is the compilation of all revelations given to Muhammad by the angel Gabriel. And the Quran was officially compiled and formally brought together under the first dynasty, the Umayyad dynasty within Islamic history. So the Quran, these are revelations that can be directly tied to Muhammad. Another important thing about the Quran is that it is only to be written in Arabic, so it is not to be translated. Now, there are other teachings as well that come from Muhammad, and these are known as hadiths. Hadiths are recognized teachings that aren't necessarily revelations. So basically, times when Muhammad expanded on the revelations that were given to him. And so they are good supplements to read to the Quran in understanding from the mouth of Muhammad the Prophet what was meant through these revelations. Now, Muhammad is recognized as basically one of the first caliphs. And caliphs in the early years of Islamic history were very important to the Dar al-Islam, the community, the world of Islam. A caliph was considered to be a religious figure, but he was not necessarily an imam, and you can't really equate him with necessarily a pope if you take a look at, say, Christian history. A caliph, first and foremost, was a political figure, but his main charge was defending the lands of the Muslim community, of the Islamic community. Now, when we look at the history of Islam, we recognize, or there is a recognition, that the first four caliphs were considered to be the rightly guided caliphs. They had a direct line, a direct connection to the Prophet himself. But within the Islamic community, following the death of the fourth caliph, a guy by the name of Ali, who was related to Muhammad, the community split. There were those who believed that the caliph that replaced Ali, an individual by the name of Muawiyah, was the proper caliph. He was the rightful caliph to continue to lead the community. Others rejected this caliph. They believed that he was what you would call a usurper, someone who assumed the throne but did not necessarily have the authority or the right to. Since then, those that recognize this continuation of the caliphate under Muawiyah, the individual who began the Umayyad dynasty, are known as Sunni. Those who believe that Ali was murdered and that Muawiyah was not an acceptable caliph to replace him are known as the Shia. And today, these are the two major groupings within the Islamic community. Now, at their heart, they generally have the same beliefs when it comes to Islam, but they have developed separate practices over the centuries. Today, Sunni and Shia communities can live together peacefully side by side in some countries and some states within the Middle East. However, there have been tensions over the centuries. One of the current tensions that we see between two of these communities is that of Iran, which is a predominantly Shia country, and some of its neighbors, which are predominantly Sunni. But what we don't really want to do is when we hear the words Sunni and Shia, we don't want to equate them necessarily to, say, different denominations within Christendom. Instead, it's really lines of authority. You know, who had the authority, who had the right to succeed one caliph from another. And then it generally involves practices unique to that group. Now, within Islam, there are different ways of interpreting Islamic law and Islamic teachings. And over the years, we've basically recognized four major schools that kind of provide the foundation of beliefs within Islam. There are other branches, other teachings within Islam, other interpretations, though, that have emerged over the years. One of which is very conservative and is found in some countries, such as Saudi Arabia, as well as in the former government of Afghanistan, known as the Taliban, and this is Wahhabism. Again, it's a very conservative one that requires usually men and women to have separate spheres within the community. Generally, very conservative Wahhabis will expect women to be fully veiled while in public. They generally reject the following of saints or the pilgrimage to saintly shrines. And again, it has become, since the 1900s, really one of the dominant groups within parts of Southwest Asia, but it is not the only group within Southwest Asia. Now, wherever Islam went, it took Islamic culture with it, and it came to really reshape the landscape, to reshape the cultural landscape. So one way that you can generally recognize that you're entering into an Islamic community is through the architecture. The mosque, which you can see on the left-hand side of your screen, is a gathering place, a worship place for the local Muslim community. And mosques are usually distinctive buildings within a city. And some of the things that make them distinct, first and foremost, are the minarets. Those are these towers right here. Minarets are crucial to the daily rituals in that the muezzin, the crier, he will come to the top of the minaret, and from there he will make a call to prayer, a call for all Muslims to gather and to pray at the same time. And it's a very beautiful call, by the way. Some of the muezzin prayer calls are works of art in and of themselves. In addition to that, traditional Islamic architecture includes a dome, a central dome at the heart of the mosque, and also these very unique arches that tend to be very pointed. One thing about Islam is that while Europe kind of lost much of the knowledge that they had gained during the Roman and the Greek empires, Islam not only maintained them, but they built on top of them. So they were able to actually build these mosques and these buildings and these palaces that were massive structures. But the architectural techniques that they use, such as this pointed arch right here, allowed them to take these tiny columns that held this massive weight and held it with grace and eloquence. So usually you go without throughout Islamic lands. One of the first things you tend to look to is first of all the skyline. Do you see the minarets in the distance? Do you see the dome of the local mosque? Do you see these archways? Do you see this very delicate yet very strong architecture? Now, another type of design, of art and architecture that we see that really kind of marks the landscape as belonging to lands inhabited by Muslims is that of calligraphy and arabesque. Calligraphy and arabesque is a type of art. Within Islam, you're not supposed to show in artwork the human face. Now, some cultures and some communities over time within Islam have been more strict than others. So you will at times find, like say in South Asian art forms, some depictions of human beings with the face, but usually the Prophet Muhammad. You never show his face within a painting. That is generally universally prohibited. So in place of the human form, in place of the human figure, they turned instead to natural designs. So arabesque, for example, that is an art form that looks to geometric patterns as a way to produce beauty. So if we are to look on this image right here, the arabesque patterns are to be found right here at the center, these geometric patterns. But they also include these floral patterns as well, patterns that are usually repetitious. Most of the time they include geometric patterns, but also sometimes include floral patterns or animals or other natural forms. Now, in addition to arabesque, there is calligraphy. In this image, examples of calligraphy can be found right here at the heart, surrounding the arabesque, the central arabesque design. What calligraphy is it's writing turned into a form of art itself. And so usually within works of calligraphy, calligraphic works of art within the Islamic world, they tend to turn to reproducing surahs from the Quran, so religious passages. And so what you can see is in here, you actually see some of the consonants, some of the lettering. They've been heightened, and they've been enhanced to form these designs that appear to be purely artistic when in fact it is a text from their most holy work. So Islam, it is one of the three Abrahamic religions. It is a major world religion. Its followers are amongst the most numerous globally in terms of religious communities. It is a religion of peace and one that has a rich history, and through the centuries has developed its own culture, and it can be seen throughout the world through the marks it has made on the cultural landscape.